Celsius here. Cooler though, with that breeze quite noticeable on those eastern coasts. That will become even more noticeable by Sunday. As we go through Saturday night, again, if you're heading out, be prepared for temperatures to drop quite sharply. It will be quite chilly once more. The winds perhaps easing off a little bit across Wales and southwest England as we head into Sunday. Maybe a touch more in the way of frost on Sunday morning. But generally, it's another fine and sunny day, certainly across much of the west. We will see more cloud on Sunday for southeast England and East Anglia, and the chance of 1 or 2 showers in East Anglia on Sunday afternoon too. But for many, it's another dry and bright day, but it won't be as warm. Temperatures still above average in the west and creeping into the teens, but certainly feeling pretty fresh on those eastern coasts. Single figures likely here. Goodbye.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion, mine, theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire and former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces are blocking humanitarian corridors to Mariupol in the southeast of the country. Rescue efforts continue there after a theatre was hit by an airstrike on Wednesday. So far, 130 people have been rescued from the site. Meanwhile, earlier today, several blasts were heard in the western city of Lviv. In the centre, more than 100 prams, pushchairs and car seats have been lined up to highlight the unknown number of children killed during the invasion. President Zelensky says work will continue to recover civilians injured in the conflict.
Rescue work is underway at the site of the bombing by the occupiers of the theatre, where Mariupol residents hid from shelling, using it as a shelter. It's known that as of now, more than 130 people have been rescued, but hundreds of Mariupol residents are still under the debris. Despite the shelling, despite all the difficulties, we will continue rescue work.
Well, in Donetsk, in eastern Ukraine, a number of people were killed after a residential building was shelled. A missile also hit a residential area in the capital, Kiev, ripping apart high-rise buildings. Former heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko, who's in the capital with his brother Vitaly, the mayor of Kiev, says his country desperately needs help.
Life is getting lost. Not just the infrastructure, life is getting lost. This is genocide of the Ukrainian population. You have to act now. Stop passively observing and stop doing business with Russia. Do it now.
Meanwhile, the Russian president has appeared at a rally in Moscow addressing the so-called special operation in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin delivered a speech to a packed stadium, thousands of people gathering on the 8th anniversary of Russia's takeover of Crimea. Chinese President Xi Jinping has told President Biden that China and the US must make efforts for world peace. The comment was made during a video call between the two leaders, which lasted just under 2 hours. According to Chinese state media, its president said conflicts and confrontations, such as the events unfolding in Ukraine, are in the interests of no one. He also said their two countries must shoulder international responsibilities and guide bilateral relations. The TV channel Russia Today has had its licence to broadcast in the UK revoked with immediate effect. Ofcom says it's not satisfied that RT can be a responsible broadcaster. With its headquarters in Moscow, the company accused the media regulator of simply being a tool of the British government and that the public is being robbed of information. Former Ofcom advisor Martin Campbell described the decision as patronising.
OK, RT, Russia Today, there is a clue in the title as to what you're going to get. And the idea that no one can put it into perspective is a little bit crazy. So, I mean, like so many things that have happened because of this invasion, it hasn't been handled very well.
In other news, demonstrations are being held in Dover, Liverpool and Hull to protest against the sacking of hundreds of seafarers by P&O Ferries.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame.
Conservative MP for Dover, Natalie Elphick, was heckled by members of the Unite Union outside Dover's Maritime House. 800 staff were made redundant via video message yesterday. Politicians and unions have condemned the move, with the RMT union seeking legal advice. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News the company must sit down now and talk with employees.
We understand that companies have to make money, otherwise they can't be in business. I mean, no problem with companies making a profit. And we understand that they may have to make changes. You do not treat your staff in that way. Pre-recorded, 30 minutes notice on a Zoom to tell you you've lost your job. In many cases of decades, people who've been working for P&O Ferries.
The Chancellor says his priority for the future is to cut taxes. Rishi Sunak says the government has been dealing with back-to-back crises and he's promised to do what he can to ease the rising cost of living. He was speaking at the Conservative Party Spring Conference.
You know, my priority going forward is to cut taxes. I can't solve every problem. No government can solve every problem, and particularly when you're grappling with global inflationary forces, you know, they are somewhat out of my control. But as you saw a month or so ago when we announced a very significant intervention to help people meet some of the additional costs of energy bills, you know, where we can make a difference, of course I can.
You're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's return to Nana Akua.
So it's just coming up to 7 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, in a few moments, we'll go live to Aberdeen to hear the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's address to the Scottish Conservatives at their party conference. I mean, he might face a mixed reception, though, because earlier this year, 27 of them, Scottish Tory MPs, they called for his resignation in the wake of the Partygate scandal. But with the Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross, who has now withdrawn his letter from the 1922 Backbench Committee and says that the Scottish Conservatives will welcome the Prime Minister. I'm with my panel this afternoon. I've got former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and also former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. So, well, I mean, it's all go, isn't it? I mean, it's the whole Tory party conference. He's addressing the Scottish out there. Boris has not had a good reception from the Scottish people at all. I'm going to start with you, Lembit. What do you think? Do you think that he will get a welcoming at all of any kind?
He'll get a polite welcoming, because the one thing that nobody had predicted was the fact that we would have a war in Europe. And I would say that without the Ukraine situation, my prediction, which I made here, which is wrong, I admit.
No, let me
go on.
Lembit and I, now I don't do betting, but I'm of the legal age, so I'm allowed to. And I wagered a bet with Lembit that actually Boris Johnson would maintain his position and Partygate would not be the end of him. I did say net zero could be, but Partygate, and that he would not be gone by the 1st of April. Lembit, however, confidently said that he would be.
And therefore, I've lost that bet.
You have, yes.
And I owe you £20,000.
Well, I'll be happy with a pizza, Lembit.
OK, I'll buy you a pizza. Pizza Hut, that'd be great. Or Pizza Express. Pizza Express, OK. But digressing, I was wrong about that. But that's because... OK, you just never let me forget this, will you?
No, never. Go on,
I even banged my microphone in anger there. I'd like to apologise for that.
So what do you think?
So he survived the situation precisely because of the war in Ukraine, how he's handled it. Many people think he's done OK there. But it does rather throw the Partygate thing into the woods. I understand why. The big question is, though, when then almost the whole of the Conservative Party in Scotland didn't like Boris Johnson, they wanted him to resign, how can you credibly say, oh, well, actually, he's all right now?
But there's nothing new, though. That's nothing new, is it? I mean, the Conservatives have pretty much Bob Hope and no hope of actually being, the leading party in Scotland. I mean, Scotland, what happened? The Labour Party used to hold the mantra there. This is why we had a very united political system, but since they've failed abysmally in Scotland, they've given the SNP a full stranglehold, pretty much. What's your view?
Well, at the moment, actually, according to the polls, the Conservatives are in 3rd place. Which means that they will not be happy. I mean, yes, I completely agree with Lembit that they will be united today. There won't be calls for his resignation. It's war. I mean, there is a war there, and so we all have to back the Prime Minister. They're not happy because what one has to remember, Lembit knows more than me, is that what MPs and MSPs really care about is their seats. And what Boris Johnson is risking is their seats. They're due to the next time there is either a general election or a Scottish election, they're due to lose a lot. And they know, and this is just very recent, this is polling this week, where Boris Johnson is he's much better than he was a while ago. So the Scottish MPs are going to be patient, but they're going to want to get rid of him.
But can I say that I've been watching this closely, Scarlett, because I felt the pain. You're right. I lost my seat when I didn't necessarily expect to. And so therefore I can speak with authority about what it looks like and what it feels like to lose. Boris is currently a liability. I'm not saying that because I dislike him. He's a friend of mine. But I don't think the Scottish Tories really think he's the right person for the job.
No, but what I'm saying is they're united now.
But they have to
They believe that if there's a war on, you have to do it. Though, interestingly, as we were going into Kuwait, they did get rid of, not the Scottish Tories, the whole Tory party got rid of Mrs Thatcher. But anyway, that's where we are. Douglas Ross has pulled back from the resignation.
But do you believe he means it?
No, of course I don't. Everything depends on the polls, right? If Boris Johnson,
really.
If Boris Johnson was seen to be a winner,
but the polls don't really say anything at all. Most of the time, they're pretty inaccurate. Sometimes they're close, but most of the time, you cannot judge on those at all.
You ask the MPs. They look at the polls. They look at the polls daily.
But they're wrong on so many levels.
If they think they are very, very worried about what's happening in Scotland, the Scottish Tories will hang together as long as they feel that we have to do it for Ukraine. and then they will go to get rid of him.
But the Tory party have never been a party that has been that successful in Scotland, as far as I can remember. The parties that were successful were people like the Labour Party, who have failed in their duty to keep hold of that, which is why Nicola Sturgeon's party is doing so well. There isn't really a credible alternative, is there?
Well, Scarlett's in a slightly better position to answer this because of her role in politics. But I'll tell you...
let her answer it then. Why are you talking? Go on.
I threw away the chance of being on TV.
Well, just say what you've got to say, then. Otherwise...
there is no question that what happened to the Labour Party in Scotland was a disaster, and there are lots of really good reasons for it, including the opposition, which is Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, who is a really, really class act. And
Really?
Oh, come on. Look
I'm glad you went first.
Yeah, no, I think Nicola Sturgeon on television, you watch her, she knows what she's doing.
And what she did to Alex Salmond, her mentor.
Yeah.
Look how she behaved
She's
towards
a class
him.
act. She got rid of him. OK? I mean, that's what you do.
Wow,
Politics
man.
is about ruthlessness. She comes in, she looks as though she's in control, and Scotland, the Labour Party in Scotland has had some leaders that lacked charisma.
They've been useless.
No, they haven't.
And I think this is why the SNP have done so well. There isn't a credible alternative. So if Boris Johnson goes and wins some votes in Scotland and he gets more than, I think it's 13 seats like the last time, if he gets more than that, then that is a bonus. They've always been the third party. I don't ever remember a time when they've been the second party, but it's the Labour Party who have failed because they are the ones who've lost most of their seats.
If I can pile on behind Nana here.
Yeah, and then I will demand the right to reply.
Well, I can say my point in 20 seconds. Surely Nana's point is right. The Labour Party, more than any other party, let the SNP succeed. Now, I'm not getting into the rights and wrongs of the SNP, but Labour had a stranglehold in Scottish politics, and you threw it all away.
I know, and one has to say that they took the electorate for granted, and that's what happens when you take the electorate for granted. And since then, they've been doing an awful lot of work. And as I said, they are now the second party, and they are pulling themselves up. They are pulling month after month. They're getting better and better. So who knows who will actually seriously go up against Nicola Sturgeon.
If you've just tuned in, this is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. In a few moments' time, we'll go live to Aberdeen. We're going to be listening to Prime Minister Boris Johnson's address to the Scottish Conservatives at their party conference. He probably will face a bit of a mixed reception because, earlier this year, 27 of the 31 Scottish Tory MSPs called for his resignation in the wake of the whole Partygate debacle. But the Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross, has now withdrawn his letter from the 1922 Backbench Committee and says that the Scottish Conservatives will welcome the Prime Minister. So joining me is my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and also former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. So why then do you think, in all seriousness, that the Conservatives have a chance to become the second party? The SNP are not going to lose everything all at once. It's the Labour Party that I'm looking at, because this is the whole reason why Brexit, I think, in some respects, has been a thing that has caused a lot of disunity amongst the three nations, or four nations even, of the United Kingdom, because Scotland is totally, taken by the SNP, and therefore it's going to be a very difficult thing to get them back into the fold.
Yeah, I have no idea what the question was. The thing about Brexit, right, is that the SNP and Labour actually agree on Brexit, is that they were both opposed to it. But I think what's important about Scotland is actually that the Labour and the Conservatives, actually in Scotland, and the Liberal Democrats, act together because they're pro-union and the SNP is anti-union. And that's the big thing. I mean, you also have to remember the feeling about independence. And then, that it was a terrible campaign.
Sorry, did you say the Labour are pro-union?
Yeah, they're pro the United Kingdom. Yeah. Labour, Lib Dems and the Conservatives are all... I mean, I know Labour, absolutely dyed-in-the-wool Labour people who would vote Conservative before SNP if it meant getting an SNP out.
Well, that's the same with SNP. They'd vote probably Labour before they'd dare vote Conservative.
What's interesting about what Scarlett said...
Interesting how they lost so many seats, the Labour Party. Sorry, go on.
No, sorry to interrupt. Scarlett makes, I think, a totally valid factual point. The other main parties were all against independence, and yet the SNP nearly got independence. That's an interesting point. One of my concerns, I think that the UK is going to be massively weakened if Scotland leaves the Union, but there's a serious possibility of it precisely because, and I'm not blaming Labour for this.
I do. I think that's precisely it. Because
then you can have a different view. I don't blame Labour for not doing well, but it's precisely because Labour haven't convinced Scotland that being part of a UK party is better than being part of a Scottish party. Lots of my friends are in the SNP, but I just don't think it's great politics to break up a strong union.
I'd say that the Labour Party, unfortunately, haven't convinced anyone.
Well, I mean, they're the second party in Scotland at the moment, right? Okay, so they've convinced quite a few people. And, I mean, the thing about independence, I mean, it was a really terrible campaign against independence. I mean,
Which Labour was heavily involved.
I know, and I'm not excusing them. Labour, the Lib Dems, all of them, they did not understand it. They went on economics only. They didn't understand that it's heart overhead. All of that. But actually, I mean, what's important is where they're going now, and how. But the other thing about independence is it really is incredibly attractive to the young. I mean, if you look at demographics, the young, they think it's trendy, that it's on, and it's a very. You have to have a very different campaign against it.
Right. I don't know if you ever watched the independence referendum within Canada when Quebec was thinking about breaking away. It was a beautiful campaign because the rest of Canada said, "Oh, please, let's stay together." It was respectful, it was warm, it was nice, and Quebec went, "Yeah, okay, we'll stay together." Now, the Labour Party, I'm going to slam, not you personally, but I'm going to slam Labour. Labour had more responsibility than any other party in Scotland to get this right. And you virtually blew it.
Yeah, I mean, I make no secret, it's a terrible campaign. But it didn't help that actually a lot of people in England were going, "We don't want you anyway." I mean, it was exactly...
Oh, it's England's fault, not Labour's fault. Come on.
Can I just say...
I've taken the responsibility.
But you guys had... I think wasn't Jeremy Corbyn at the helm, so I think that's probably part of the problem that they had there. But
it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn, actually.
Oh, who was it? Sorry.
It was Ed.
Oh, just as bad. Right, so if we move away slightly from the Scottish Conservative Party conference, we're still waiting for Boris's speech. The Conservatives are also holding their own spring conference in Blackpool, with suggestions that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's position has improved from the dire straits that he found himself in recent months. We sent GB News' political correspondent to Blackpool to test the mood amongst the Tory party faithful. So earlier, Tom spoke to Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who had some strong words for the management of P&O after their abrupt layoff of 800 employees yesterday. But first, following Mr Shapps' declaration in his speech earlier that he wanted Britain to become the largest economy in Europe, Tom asked him how he expected to make that happen.
Well, infrastructure is a big part of that. Skills, education, the things which build an economy are the things which make everybody in that economy have opportunities. That makes them productive. That builds a bigger economy. It's that simple. You know, Britain has always, been obviously geographically a limited amount of space. What's been the difference for Britain in the past are our people, and that's the difference that we can have again if we bring this all together.
Now, you said that there'd be 96 billion in terms of infrastructure, in terms of railway infrastructure spending, but that northern leg of HS2, that's not going ahead.
So 96 billion is just the rail investment, and that's only the rail investment in the Midlands and North. There's other rail investment, there's other road investment, and much else besides. So this is an enormous sum of money. No government since Victorian times have done anything on this scale. And you talk about what's happening in the North. Manchester, for example, will have not one but two high-speed lines because of HS2 coming in from the south, and then a west-east line from Warrington, Manchester over to Yorkshire. So there is, huge and ambitious plans. You'll be able to travel from Manchester to Leeds in just over 30 minutes. At the moment, that journey is probably 55 minutes. Liverpool to London, cut by 40 minutes. So this is massive investment. Don't listen to those people who say, 96 billion's crumbs off the table. That's an actual quote from a Labour mayor. I mean, 96 billion pounds. That's what they think crumbs is? Goodness help us.
No one's doubting there's significant investment and improvements going ahead. Was it wrong, therefore, to speak about even more improvements beforehand that had to be scaled back a little bit?
Well, no, first of all, I just want to tackle the idea that we're not delivering on what we said we were going to do. We're going to have a high-speed kind of system that will run from London to the northwest. It will also cut a lot of time off journeys along the east coast and to, for example, to Leeds, up to Scotland. So we're going to deliver, and we're going to deliver it in the biggest way any government has ever done. We're still going to run HS2 trains to Leeds, for example. I keep reading that we're not. That's not true. We said we are. We're about to undertake a study to get them there. So HS2 trains going up the eastern leg to Leeds as well.
Now, moving on to the passenger locator form, you spoke in quite an ideological way about how you hated the sort of paperwork, papers, please society. That's been abolished this morning. Can you guarantee it will never come back?
4 a.m. this morning. I should have woken up. I have to confess I was asleep. I should have woken up to celebrate the moment. I hated that form, asking people, where are you going to come when you get home? When will you be leaving your home when you get home? These are things which are normally no business of the state, and I really never want us to have to go back to that situation. I don't know what will happen with coronavirus or viruses in the future, but I hope the enthusiasm with which I've scrapped it and the government scrapped this form indicates it's not in our hearts to go there if we can possibly ever avoid it.
Now, one of the biggest round of applause for you came from your condemnation of the owners of P&O, their pre-recorded Zoom message, that mass sacking. Was your problem with the way it was done, or the fact that a company is restructuring at all?
Well, we understand that companies have to make money, otherwise they can't be in business. I mean, no problem with companies making a profit. And we understand that they may have to make changes. You do not treat your staff in that way. Pre-recorded, 30 minutes notice on a Zoom to tell you you've lost your job, in many cases of decades, people who've been working for P&O Ferries. So yes, it's partly the way in which it's done. Mainly, they've got to sit down. Right? In my constituency, I happen to have some of the supermarkets headquartered, the HQs, and sometimes they have to pull back depending on market conditions. They sit down. They consult with the employees. They understand and assist them into new roles. I've seen none of that from P&O. I think the management of P&O Ferries have taken really two of the proudest initials in maritime history, P and O, and turned it into P-off.
Should the government step in to make it right?
Well, there are laws in place to deal with these sort of things. So we're, first of all, I know the unions, I know the workers, and P&O are making sure that the laws have been followed, number one. Number two, I want to still see I think that a P&O ferry management can still rescue this situation. They can get around the table and talk to those individuals, and I want to see them do that. And number three, I'm asking my officials to identify, for example, whether we have government contracts with P&O Ferries. I don't know the answer to that yet, which could be looked at in the light of all of this. So I think this is a long way to run yet, and I want to see those workers who have given their lives in many cases to P&O Ferries properly rewarded. And one final thing, my phone has been ringing with offers from blue chip company bosses, I mean names that everyone knows, who want to employ those people. So they won't be out of work for long, that's for sure.
Well, Grant Shapps, thank you for joining us here on GB News.
Thanks, Tom.
That was, of course, yes, Grant Shapps speaking to Tom Harwood. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We'll bring you Boris Johnson's speech at the Scottish Conservative Party as soon as he decides to do it, even though it was supposed to be 4 o'clock. But never mind, it's live, and I suppose that's what happens when you do live TV. But let's kick off with the debate. And I'm with my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Here's what's coming up in the show. Each Friday at 5 o'clock, we take a focus on a particular guest or subject matter. And today, with millions of people facing a cost of living crisis and being unable to afford their bills, we'll take a look at the impact that might have on their credit score and their ability in future to take out loans or be granted a mortgage, especially after the pandemic as well. A lot of people were affected by that and now may be struggling to remortgage, or even those who have points that are put on their credit markers for no apparent reason. We'll be discussing that with the boss at Experian. I'll be joined by the head of consumer affairs. He's it's one of the biggest credit recording companies in the UK. Now, the Great British Debate this hour: should Rishi Sunak scrap scrap the national insurance rise. On the day the Conservative Party conference launches in Blackpool, the party chairman, Oliver Dowden, says that taxes shouldn't be going up anymore and that he didn't join the Tory party to take more people's money away in taxation. So I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance hike that's due next month, which will add hundreds of pounds actually to household bills as well? We'll speak to the doctor who's warning women about the dangers of buying our HRT on the so-called black market. Demand and a supply shortage for hormone replacement therapy, which relieves symptoms of the menopause, has led to some women buying from unqualified and unlicensed sources. Tell me what your views are on everything we're discussing. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. So 27 minutes after 4 o'clock, and it's now time for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance rise in April? As the Conservative Party's conference kicks off in Blackpool, the party chairman Oliver Dowden warned that the Tories can't have taxes going up anymore. He said he didn't join the Conservative Party to take more people's money off them away in taxation. I mean, I agree. I think a lot of people voted Conservative thinking that that would not be happening. The comments come ahead of Rishi Sunak's spring statement next week and pressure from some MPs for the Chancellor to scrap the planned national insurance hike due to take effect next month. But do you think he'll listen? Well, at the party conference in Blackpool today, Chancellor Rishi Sunak responded to the criticism by saying, "We've made the difficult decisions that we've had to make, but my plan going forward is to cut taxes." Well, maybe you could start it now. So I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance rise? Please get in touch, let us know your views. I'm joined now by Varun Kanish, the Campaigns and Communications Manager at Turn to Us, a national charity that helps people in financial hardship. Varun, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Now, how important is Rishi Sunak's spring statement going to be next week for families across the UK?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having us on. Let's be honest, April's going to be the worst cost of living crisis for about half a century. It's critical that the Chancellor reconsider some of his stances and perhaps reverse some of the decisions that were made last year, including perhaps the cut to universal credit back in October. Looking at the maths, that 1.25% increase to national insurance is actually, on average, £250 a year extra for workers, which is massive. And you add to that the rise in fuel, energy costs. It's just not enough what they're doing, and I think they're going to have to clean up the mess the next year and the next year and every budget since. So now's his chance to kind of reset things and help people, especially those on the lowest incomes.
But he would argue that this has to be done because of the hole that was left from the pandemic, and also there's a huge backlog in the waiting lists for the NHS. And also the care, the healthcare system and social care. That's what that money is supposedly earmarked for. Where would you suggest that he would get the money for that from?
In terms of where he'll get that income from, it's not my place to make that recommendation. That's for the government. Thinking long term, thinking about families across the country, especially those communities, minoritized ethnic communities, the disabled people who are worst impacted, especially by the pandemic. We really do have to think, we're not out of the pandemic yet. We're still feeling the bruises from the past 18 months more. Now's an opportunity to set things right. People are getting back into work. There's still insecure jobs out there. We know from our helpline people that contacted the helpline couldn't afford the absolute basics. We've seen the increase in use of food banks. If you look at inflation is going to go between 7 and 8%. There are actually rumours that it could go up to 8.4%, which is a record. And yet universal credit and pensions are only going up to 3.1%. So it's a real term loss for people. And we simply can't let that happen.
Well, Varam, thank you very much for talking to us. That's Varam Khanna. She's the Campaigns and Communications Manager for Turn to Us. I'm also joined by Senior Research Economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Ben Saranko. Ben, you'll be hearing Rishi Sunak's spring statement closely. Do you think that he's likely to go back on the planned national insurance rise?
I think it's unlikely for two main reasons. One, as you alluded to just a moment ago, the planned rise in national insurance is to pay for higher spending on health and social care, and in particular, to allow the funds and the resources for the NHS to start cracking on with the backlog and the big waiting list for care that has emerged during the pandemic. Those pressures aren't going anywhere, and that's a long-term challenge that we've got as a country, and an ageing population and the upwards pressure on the health service means that those pressures aren't going to go anywhere, and that tax rise at some point is probably going to be needed. So scrapping it this year or scrapping it altogether is just going to be storing up problems for some future date. But secondly, I think people are most concerned with right now is understanding the impact on households, and in particular, the impact of higher energy bills and what that means for people's living standards and for people's ability to get by. Now, the national insurance rise will affect mostly those on higher incomes. The more you earn, the more you will pay. If you were to scrap that rise, the main beneficiaries would be those higher earners. And it wouldn't help those who you're perhaps most worried about, those at the bottom end of the distribution, maybe those on benefits, maybe poorer pensioners. Those people wouldn't benefit at all. So it would be a very expensive and very poorly targeted way trying to deal with the energy crisis. And if he is going to do something to support households, as I suspect he will, it's more likely to be something more targeted, much more laser focused on perhaps those at the bottom end via universal credit or via cancel tax, something like that, rather than the very blunt instrument of cancelling the planned national insurance rise.
So it sounds like you think it's a good idea that he's doing the national insurance rise now. But what would you say to someone who would say, well, actually, aren't you reducing the amount that people can spend within the economy? Therefore, aren't you slowing down the economy in this fashion? Why don't you just allow people to continue to spend? They'll have more money in their pocket. It grows confidence in the economy grows. I mean, surely doing that now is not really the best thing to do.
I'm not offering a view on whether taxes should go up or down. It's a politician's question. I'm not a politician. I'm just trying to offer some of the thinking that might be going on inside the Treasury. But in response to your question, yes, if you increase national insurance or income tax or any other tax like that, you are going to reduce the amount of money in people's pockets that they can go out and spend. And that will, all else being equal, restrict growth in the economy. But it's worth saying that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, have actually recommended that Mr. Sunak do even more tax rises because they're worried about the level of inflation in the economy, and they're worried about that becoming entrenched and becoming a long-run thing. Those of your viewers who are perhaps a little older or with longer memories might remember the experience of previous decades, where they're saying that if we increase taxes more now, that might help to squeeze inflation out of the economy. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's the right thing to do, but there are good reasons for this tax rise to go ahead. There are also good arguments against it. I don't think it's just as simple as saying more pounds in people's pockets is 100% always better.
Interesting stuff. Well, thank you very much for talking to us about that, Ben. That's Ben Saranko, who's a senior research economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It is the great British debate this hour. I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak now scrap the national insurance rise? Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. John says, if the national insurance rise is specifically for the NHS, I think it should stay. Adam says, how exactly did people imagine we would pay for having half the workforce doing nothing at home, receiving free money for 2 years? See, that's it. A lot of the people who didn't benefit from that whole system are the ones that are possibly paying more tax and also paying for it, yet some people were able to stay at home and get paid. Let's see, who else we've got? I'm not sure who that is, but somebody's remaining anonymous. Sarah said, scrap the national insurance rise whilst you're at it. Scrap fuel tax too. I'm with Sarah on that, absolutely. This ridiculous 25% green levy. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Still to come, we'll continue the great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance rise? You'll hear the thoughts from my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. First, let's get your latest news headlines. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 4:35. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom.
The president of Ukraine says Russian forces are blocking humanitarian corridors to Mariupol in the southeast of the country. Rescue efforts are continuing after a theatre was hit by an airstrike on Wednesday. So far, 130 people have been rescued from the site. However, President Zelensky says hundreds remain in the debris. Meanwhile, earlier today, several blasts were heard in the western city of Lviv. In the centre, more than 100 prams, pushchairs and car seats have been lined up to highlight the unknown number of children killed during the invasion. Russia today has had its licence to broadcast in the UK revoked with immediate effect. Ofcom says it's not satisfied that RT can be a responsible broadcaster. With its headquarters in Moscow, the company accused the media regulator of being a tool for the British government, saying the public is being robbed of information. Around 100 protesters have gathered outside the London offices of DP World, the owner of P&O Ferries. That's as similar demonstrations are being held in Dover, Liverpool and Hull, protesting against the sacking of 800 seafarers. They were made redundant via video message, leading politicians and unions to condemn the move. And the Chancellor says his priority for the future is to cut taxes. Speaking at the Conservative Party Spring Conference, Rishi Sunak said the government has been dealing with back-to-back crises. He also promised to do what he can to ease the rising cost of living. Well, on TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. Nana Akua will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, we will bring you Boris Johnson's speech at the Scottish Conservative Party conference live when he eventually takes the stage. But first, let's get back to our great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance rise? Now, at the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool this morning, the Chancellor addressed criticism from some of his own MPs over his decision to go ahead with the national insurance hike next month. The party chairman, Oliver Dowden, shared his concern over the Tories' tax policy, and he claims that he didn't join the Conservative Party to make it take more people's money away in taxation. I think a lot of people who voted for them didn't also vote for them to do that either. So I'm asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance rise? Let's see what my panel make of that. I've got former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Right, so Scarlett, I'm going to start with you. Yes, they're raising taxes, national insurance hike. What's your view on it initially, anyway?
I think the national insurance hike is the wrong thing to do. I think that, as both your contributors said, I mean, we're facing unprecedented problems for ordinary working people. We've got fuel and energy prices. We've got food prices going up. They can't afford it. On the other hand, we need that money for the NHS. There is no question that we need money. The NHS is absolutely on its knees. I just think they need to be more creative.
Interesting. I mean, but I would like to know exactly how they plan to spend the money, though, because the NHS receives a lot of money, and a lot of it wastes, billions actually each year. But Lembit, your view?
Yeah, the NHS, just one word on that, it does its best, and it wastes money by trying to do the right thing. I think there's too much management in it, but that's a different debate.
Well, I don't think it is, because part of that money will be going for things like that, won't it?
It can do, but it's a very complicated process, and it's not a private sector business, so it hasn't got quite the same competitive spirit. And I don't want it to have. I want it to be nationalised. It saved my life.
Well, I'm just going to say that you said that, but actually Rishi Sunak has said that what he's going to do is he's going to pay individual trusts for getting the waiting list down, basically. So that money might not go... It doesn't sound to me like some of that money is going directly into care. What it's going to go into is incentivising the trusts to reach their targets, and then they'll get more money. That's the kind of thing.
Okay.
So payment by results, as they used to have, which was scrapped.
Okay, small picture, big picture. Small picture is you set something in to place like that, cut waiting list, and you can play the system. You don't make anyone better necessarily, you just cut the waiting list. Big picture, saved my mum's life. She got to 81, and she wouldn't have done that without the NHS. So I don't mind paying for the NHS. I don't even mind paying for the inefficiency. The core question you asked, Scarlett, and the question that I'll answer is, should he raise taxes? Absolutely not. Scarlett was right. We're talking about thousands of pounds a year extra in energy. Why? Because of ridiculous, stupid policies about environmental net zero gains and all this sort of thing. I know you've heard me say this before.
I know. I wondered how long it would take you to come with that. But you're right.
It's taken 45 minutes, actually.
It's quite impressive for
Which is good for me, yeah. But the thing is, if we think it's more important to try to cut CO2, and I will stop myself on that debate there is no climate emergency, by the way, then let's charge £2,000 a year extra for people who can't afford to pay it. £2,000 a year for energy instead of £250 saving from national insurance. Let's get a sense of perspective here. We've actually got to get back onto the right track when it comes to making strategic policy decisions, and everything else is dwarfed by these other ridiculous decisions. I promise you I'm not going to go down that path in terms of the environmental agenda, but you can see how things are skewed in this situation.
Well, look, my argument with this is I don't mind paying for a health service either. I'm glad that we've got something like this to look after people in their hour of need. My issue is with the amount of money that the NHS wastes, and that is billions. And if you stopped that, then I reckon just by doing that alone, you wouldn't even need to raise the taxes. I think you get a lot of money out of them, and nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about making...
Everybody talks about NHS waste. They talk... I mean,
but
honestly, I am really bored, decade after decade, of, in particular, but Labour as well, in particular, Conservative health secretaries getting up and saying, I'm going to stop waste, I'm going to sack middle management, I'm going to do this.
Well, they never do they?
Actually, all the time that I've ever worked with anybody in the NHS, and I spent a lot of time in the NHS being a patient, and like your mum has had my life saved rather often, I mean, they are brilliant. And the point that you talk to the managers, and they are doing their best. It is really, really difficult. No, Nana, what do you know? What do you know about managing the NHS?
What do I know about managing? OK, so my mother was a midwife and she was there for many, many years.
Right.
OK, so what I know about managing anything, and if I look at a business, I would actually put my energy into the front line of the NHS. So, and I actually studied a business degree, interestingly enough, Scarlett. So for me, my view as somebody who's looking at the NHS, which ultimately is a business, because it needs to stay afloat, is that it's extremely wasteful. And the first first thing I would do in any business before pumping any money into it is get rid of the waste and the inefficiencies. It's what any normal person does when they want to cut costs. And that's what I would do. Looking at my bank account, I'd say, where am I wasting money so that I could spend my money in the right area and save money? And they're not even doing that. They're not even doing that. You keep throwing money into something, but doesn't mean it's going to get any better, or the money that's going to go to the right place.
You're talking as though there's nobody with a business degree in the NHS, right?
No, I'm not. I didn't say that. You said that.
No, the NHS is actually full of people who come in and try and do it differently.
Well, I'll tell you what now, I think we can go live to Aberdeen where the Prime Minister is addressing the delegates at the Scottish Conservative Party conference.
Good afternoon. Well, everybody, it's fantastic to be here in Aberdeen, and I know that everybody here this afternoon will remember the words that Xenia that you've just given us. What an extraordinary and moving speech. And I just want to say to you and to everybody here, Xenia, what I told President Volodymyr Zelensky again on the phone this morning from my office. I said, we stand with you, and at a time when your people are facing such horror with such courage, when you are fighting not just for your lives and your homes and your democracy, and the cause of democracy and freedom itself, we know that we must do more to help. I told Volodymyr, and I pledge to you that we will. And thank you for pointing out that it was the UK that months ago saw the threat of the Putin war machine and how that could be unleashed. And yes, it's true that we were the first European country to begin sending defensive weaponry, and where we led, dozens are now following. We also led the way in sanctioning SWIFT and Aeroflot. We've now sanctioned about 1,000 individuals and companies, distraining their yachts, dispossessing of them of their ill-gotten gains and assets. But I think that we all feel that we can and we will do more around the world. And we will do more with defensive weapons to help our Ukrainian friends against these pitiless bombardments. We will do more to tighten the vice around Putin's economy. And with every day that the slaughter, the inhuman behavior of Putin's war machine continues, I think that the resolve of the world to do more is growing. And I am more than ever convinced that Putin will fail. He will fail because he will fail in his catastrophic venture in Ukraine because he fatally underestimated the heroism and the resolve of the Ukrainians to fight. He underestimated Western unity. And among other things, by the way, he underestimated the passionate commitment of the people of this country to help. And since that great Aberdonian Michael Gove announced the scheme on Monday, we've seen 147,000 people and families across the UK open their homes to the evacuees. By the way, many of the offers here in Scotland, Aberdeenshire, I'm told, has the highest number so far. There you go. Quite right. Well done, but well done, Aberdeenshire. Well done, all those who are doing it. Only a few weeks ago, I was up here and I met some highly skilled shipbuilders in Rosyth who were fitting out 2 minesweepers to go to help the Ukrainian Navy. And of course, we will get them into the Black Sea as soon as it is practicable to do so. But there is more that we can do now. And there's one crucial way that we can all begin to help the world to stand up to Putin. And that is to wean ourselves off dependence on his oil and gas. And in that great national effort, a great national effort and a great international effort, Scotland will be in the lead. And I mean doubling down on the UK's production of offshore wind energy, much of it driven by the great Aeolian gusts of wind that I've seen myself off the Scottish coast. Wind, double down on that, force march to more wind. I mean investing in tidal, We put 39 million into some revolutionary projects, some of them here in Scotland. I mean, more solar power, more nuclear power. We've got to make some big bets on UK nuclear power. By the way, I mean a lot more hydrogen, which, as I understand it, is already powering the buses here in Aberdeen. Is that right? That's extraordinary. It's fantastic. I also mean making sensible use of this country's own natural hydrocarbon resources. And are we not crazy to be talking about completely shutting down domestic production only to buy oil and gas at a vast markup from Vladimir Putin's Russia? And yet that, unbelievably, is the stated policy of the Scottish National Party and the Labour Party. Of course, it was in Glasgow that the world came together for that epoch-making, wonderful COP26 summit, and we all pledged to move beyond coal and hydrocarbon-fueled vehicles and to plant billions of trees. And of course, look at what we've already done. Look at how fast we've decarbonised our economy and our industry. Of course, we can continue the transition to a low-carbon future. We can get to net zero. In fact, we can continue to lead the world in cutting carbon emissions as we have done. But it is also vital to recognise that in this transition there will be a continuing and vital role, important role, for oil and gas, not least in producing hydrogen. And that's why it makes sense for the government, our government, to continue to help that crucial industry in the northeast of Scotland with a North Sea transition deal worth £16 billion. And I repeat, what is the policy of Labour and the SNP? Turn off the taps now, cap the wells. What a disaster that would be. It would mean prices up even further. It would mean jobs lost just when householders are feeling the pinch of the high gas and oil prices. And of course, it would mean exposing the UK to continued blackmail from Vladimir Putin. Together, our country, the UK, is leading the world in standing up to the hydrocarbon drug-pushing bully of the Kremlin. And together, we're going to wean ourselves off that addiction to Russian hydrocarbons, and together, we are a force for good in the world. Because look at the record, as Xenia said, it was as Team UK that we invented, developed, bottled, distributed the AstraZeneca vaccine that has saved millions of lives around the world. And by the way, it's development officials in East Kilbride who help it, even now, to get it to the countries that need it. And it was as one Team UK that we got through COVID together, from the furlough that was delivered by the might and firepower of the UK Treasury to the testing systems that relied on labs across the country. I saw them myself here in Glasgow, to the vaccine and the booster rollout so fast that the UK now has the fastest growing economy in the G7. And whatever the occasional cosmetic differences between the different parts of the UK and the way we handled the pandemic, sometimes perhaps judiciously magnified for political effect. The overwhelming reality is that we have moved forward together. And now is the time, as we bounce out of COVID, to learn from that success and to go beyond the failed economic model of previous decades and to unleash the full potential of every part of the United Kingdom. When we Conservatives see inequality, our instinct is not to tear people down and to punish success. We believe in giving people the tools to level up. So when we see wages 50% lower in Inverclyde than they are in East Renfrewshire, we celebrate and encourage the achievement of those who are doing well. But we also believe that with better infrastructure and better technology and better skills, we can unleash such energy and talent and trigger such a tsunami of investment that this can be and will be the most prosperous economy in Europe. And that's why we're working directly with the 32 local councils in Scotland to distribute the Levelling Up funds. because we know that local people understand best where the opportunities are, and we won't let politics or structures get in the way. We're spending £5 billion to deliver gigabit broadband across the whole country, bringing a smile even to the humblest crofter, appearing as he does so often on our screens, as he goes online, waistcoat. And now is the time. Now is the time. We're very, very good friends, as I told you before. Now is the time to go beyond the parochialism and constitutional myopia of the SNP and drive forward projects that will bring jobs and growth to the whole UK, as Peter Hendy has pointed out in his excellent union connectivity review, which I hope you'll have studied. The A1, the A77, the A75, most of which goes through Alistair's constituency, if not his farm. Some of which goes through his farm, I imagine, or goes through some of his farm. Improving the West Coast main line. And of course, yes, one day, logically, it must come. HS2 must come to Scotland as well. And I'm glad that we're working with the Scottish administration to create at least 2 new free ports. Other applications are invited. They will be super fertilised seed beds for new high-wage, high-skilled jobs. We're strengthening the position of the UK as the science superpower of Europe. From a computer outside Edinburgh that I went to see recently, based on, I think, quantum physics, it's able to hold 2 positions at once, a bit like the SNP on NATO. It makes 1 billion computations by this means every second. The International Barley Hub in Dundee, helping to prevent global food shortages by protecting crops against pests, to the burgeoning Scottish space sector in Ayrshire and Shetland, and the spaceport in Caithness. And after his great success on Russia Today, perhaps we should invite Alex Salmond to join his fellow cosmonauts in orbit. And wouldn't it be a splendid thing for him to do? I have a feeling that might be one of the issues on which Nicola Sturgeon and I secretly see eye to eye. And it is by driving that levelling up agenda in every part of Scotland and every part of the UK, by a relentless focus on people's real priorities, combined with a fearless interrogation every week of the First Minister, that Douglas Ross has been able to defy the sceptics, stop Nicola Sturgeon from getting overall majority, as people said that she would, get more votes than any previous Scottish Conservative leader, including Ruth Davidson, brilliant though she is, 100,000 more votes. And I'll tell you the other reason why Douglas has been so successful. He's the only political leader in Scotland saying loud and clear what should be blindingly obvious to everyone, that this is not the moment to be having another referendum. This is not the time. This is not the time for yet more delectable disputations about the Constitution when our European continent is being ravaged by the most vicious war since 1945, and when public services and the economy need to recover from the pandemic. And how incredible that Labour should be so spiritually cowed that they have become nothing but the lapdogs and the enablers of the SNP. And on the subject of rolling over and having your tummy tickled, how incredible, waving the white flag, how incredible that even now it should be the policy of the SNP, quite seriously, to respond to Putin's saber-rattling by getting rid of this country's nuclear deterrent. Along by the way, with 11,000 jobs in Scotland. And be in no doubt that at any UK general election, it would be those terrible twins, Labour and the Nats, the Scottish Nationalist Party, each vying to be more left-wing, more high-taxing, more generally hectoring and bossy and nannying, that would try to form a coalition And by the way, be in no doubt that Labour would rather work with the nationalists to bring down this government than work with us to stop the SNP from breaking up Britain. That is the reality. When we face so many challenges, but when we also have so much going for us and so much to look forward to, let's put that endless, confected division behind us. And let's take this country forward in a way that makes us all proud, delivering prosperity and opportunity at home and giving leadership that makes us a force for good around the world. That's what this Conservative government delivers. That's what Scottish Conservatives delivers. And that's the agenda, massive and exciting, that should be our focus in the months ahead. Thank you, Xenia, and thank you all very much. Thank you.
So that was Boris Johnson addressing the Scottish Conservatives at the party conference in Aberdeen. We'll bring you some reaction to that from my panel, Liberal Democrat Lembit Opik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. We'll get back in a moment. So this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and it's yours. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 5:02. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces are blocking humanitarian corridors to Mariupol in the southeast of the country. Rescue efforts continue there after a theatre was hit by an airstrike on Wednesday. So far, 130 people have been rescued from the site. Meanwhile, earlier today, several blasts were heard in the western city of Lviv. In the centre, more than 100 prams, pushchairs and car seats have been lined up to highlight the unknown number of children killed during the invasion. President Zelensky says work will continue to recover civilians injured in the conflict.
Rescue work is underway at the site of the bombing by the occupiers of the theatre where Mariupol residents hid from shelling, using it as a shelter. It's known that as of now, more than 130 people have been rescued, but hundreds of Mariupol residents are still under the debris. Despite the shelling, despite all the difficulties, we will continue rescue work.
Meanwhile, the Russian president has appeared at a rally in Moscow addressing the so-called special operation in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin delivered a speech to a packed stadium, thousands of people gathering on the 8th anniversary of Russia's takeover of Crimea. Chinese President Xi Jinping has told President Biden that China and the US must make efforts for world peace. The comment was made during a video call between the two leaders, which lasted just under 2 hours. According to Chinese state media, its president said conflicts and confrontations, such as the events unfolding in Ukraine, are in the interests of no one. He also said their two countries must shoulder international responsibilities and guide bilateral relations. The TV channel Russia Today has had its licence to broadcast in the UK revoked with immediate effect. Ofcom says it's not satisfied that RT can be a responsible broadcaster. With its headquarters in Moscow, the company accused the media regulator of simply being a tool for the British government and that the public is being robbed of information. Former Ofcom advisor Martin Campbell described the decision as patronising.
Okay, RT, Russia Today, there is a clue in the title as to what you're going to get. And the idea that no one can put it into perspective is a little bit crazy. So, I mean, like so many things that have happened because of this invasion, it hasn't been handled very well.
To other news now, and the Business Secretary has written to the chairman of P&O Ferries to express the government's anger and disappointment following the sudden sacking of 800 staff. In the letter, Kwasi Kwarteng questioned the legality of the sackings, saying the company appeared to have failed to follow the necessary processes. It comes as hundreds of protesters demonstrated against the sackings in Dover, Liverpool and Hull, as well as outside the London office of parent company DP World. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News the company must sit down now and talk with employees.
We understand that companies have to make money, otherwise they can't be in business. I mean, no problem with companies making a profit. And we understand that they may have to make changes. You do not treat your staff in that way. Pre-recorded, 30 minutes notice on a Zoom to tell you you've lost your job. In many cases of decades, people who've been working for P&O Ferries.
The Chancellor says his priority for the future is to cut taxes. Rishi Sunak says the government has been dealing with back-to-back crises and he's promised to do what he can to ease the rising cost of living. He was speaking at the Conservative Party Spring Conference.
My priority going forward is to cut taxes. I can't solve every problem. No government can solve every problem, and particularly when you're grappling with global inflationary forces, they are somewhat out of my control. But as you saw a month or so ago when we announced a very significant intervention to help people meet some of the additional costs of energy bills, where we can make a difference, of course I can.
Well, you're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
So good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion, mine, theirs, and of course yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Still to come, in a few moments, we'll put the focus on a particular guest or subject matter in my Friday Focus. With millions of people facing a cost of living crisis and being unable to afford their bills, we'll take a look at the impact that might have on your credit score and their ability in future to take out loans to be granted a mortgage. I'll be joined by the head of consumer affairs at one of the biggest credit recording companies in the UK, Experian. We'll also find out how, if you do have bad credit, how you can improve that score. The Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Thousands of former employees have been protesting across the country today after the firm sacked 800 staff without giving them any real notice. P&O says that the decision was due to a loss of £100 million last year, year on year. In fact, I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? You can get your views in GB Views at gbnews.uk, or why not tweet me at GB News. So within the last few moments, we've heard that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, as he addressed the Scottish Conservatives at their party conference in Aberdeen this afternoon. So let's start this hour by getting some reaction to that speech. I'm joined by former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Right, we've heard the speech. What did you make of it?
What a mess. I used to be leader of the Welsh Lib Dems at the most successful period in its history in Wales. But I digress. I digress. What I would say is that there was no narrative. No, don't comment. That was rhetorical. What I noticed was there wasn't really any narrative there. He said that he wanted to produce more hydrogen, which is meant to be a green fuel, by using fossil fuels.
Yes, that's that's the worst way to produce hydrogen.
It's ridiculous.
It's the worst way. He should know that, seeing as he's got this net zero agenda. Yeah. That he's talking about using fossil fuels to create another fuel that can then fuel something. You might as well just use the fossil fuel.
Yeah, it's not even logical. And so what's his policy on that? So there's that, and we could talk about that. He was also talking about the story of increasing, it seemed to me, fossil fuel production at the same time. It's almost related to that. Then he praised Douglas Ross, who'd called for his resignation, and then seemed to damn Douglas Ross's predecessor. It was all over the place.
Well, no, he didn't damn her. He said that Ruth Davidson, and he actually said he quite liked her and she did a great job, but what he said was that he has done an even better job and increased the number of seats or the majority.
I wouldn't be too happy if I was Ruth Davidson.
I don't think that's
didn't
fair
really
comment.
lead. Okay, well, I would simply say, if somebody called for my resignation, I wouldn't expect anyone to believe I was actually praising him.
But he also praised Michael Gove, and Michael Gove was another one. That's another Judas, wasn't he, initially, who didn't really, he sort of backstabbed him when he was going for the leadership.
Look, all I'll say is that was a bits and pieces speech that didn't seem to be properly thought out. And Boris can do much better than that. Boris, I'm not sure which camera I'm on, you can do better than that. You could have actually given a statesperson-like speech there, and I just don't think you did. And I say that as a critical friend.
Well, he's probably, friends like you, Lembit.
I lost my seat.
Maybe you should take a leaf out of his book and be nice to people. But yeah, interestingly, though, he did start the whole thing by talking about the good things, didn't he? Obviously, the things that we've done with the war and everything else like that, and the vaccine rollout. He spent half the time talking about that. But what did you make of it, Scarlett?
I just thought it was really boring. Actually, I mean, I really tried to concentrate. This is supposed to be one of our great orators, and he skipped between reading something that wasn't particularly well written. I don't believe it was written by him, and sort of improvising, stuttering away, not quite starting, not quite. You never knew. You were waiting for him to go into a Peppa Pig moment. Frankly, I mean, it was. And then what was so interesting? So this is a party leader speaking at his conference. The applause was minimal.
It was.
I mean, the laughter barely existed. So no, there were no boos, right? One didn't expect boos. But honestly, this was not a leader that you felt was getting anywhere. I just it just got nowhere. It was instantly forgettable. Actually, I'm trying to think what was in it.
It didn't feel like his usual form of energy, but then I suppose he does get criticised a lot for that sort of behaviour. So I think maybe today he tried to be restrained and not give the media any nuggets that they could use against him.
The issue, I'm by trade a trainer, and if I was training him for public speaking, I'd say, give the group permission to give you control. And he did not do that. He looked apologetic. He looked uncertain. Now, it's not surprising, because he knows 27 of his most senior politicians in Scotland have called for him to resign. I'm not sure anybody really believes they've changed their view, but because of the Ukraine situation, people pull together. It's a point that actually you've made as well, Scarlett. When it comes down to it, Boris can do better than that. Even if he wanted to pretend, he could have pretended better than he did.
I suppose at a party conference, you're usually preaching to the converted, aren't you? But
didn't
on
look
this
like
occasion,
it to me today.
I don't think. Well, it doesn't. Well, he's in a bit of a quandary, I think, because on one hand, he wants the parts of Scotland to vote Conservative, but they never do they? So he's already on a losing streak for this. But on the other hand, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives must sort of support him, but then make it look like he is not a Conservative so that he can get the support. It's a difficult dilemma.
Can I be really rude and just get a second bite here? I just remembered something that happened to me before I left.
What if I said no?
Then I would be quiet.
No,
I respect the authority of the presenter.
Just as well.
I
we
wouldn't
both
dare
do.
otherwise.
Absolutely.
There is an ejector button on that seat. At any point you will go. So
yes, this is an ejector seat, I think.
That'd be funny.
I'll simply funny for you, yeah, that's out my head. I knew when it was time for me to stop being leader of the Welsh Lib Dems, because I could sense it by my senior command. They didn't say so. They didn't do it like they've done it to Boris. So I resigned the position. I was leader for 6 years, and it was the right time to go. And I think everybody was relieved, because it meant that we didn't get into this awkward situation. I think that Boris, in Scotland's view, Scottish Tories' view, has overstayed his welcome. So now we've ended up in this difficult situation where, ironically, the one person who's sustained his leadership is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, interesting you should say that, but I don't think that the Conservative Parties are never... The leader of the Conservative Party is very rarely welcomed in Scotland, so he was already on the back foot.
Oh, I think they're welcomed by the party faithful. This was... So this speech had two aims. I mean, one was it will be taken live in Scotland as it was taken live here. So he has the hundreds of thousands of people that he could speak to, that he could persuade. I don't believe he persuaded any of them. And then he had his faithful that really he wanted to get. I mean, Boris loves to be loved, right?
Well, who doesn't?
And we didn't
Scarlett,
feel.
Who doesn't love to be loved?
I love to be
Come
loved,
on.
but he didn't. He didn't do it. Every now and again, you sort of. He had these phrases like, you know, tickle their tummy, hold the white flag, but nothing worked.
Well, maybe it's about time he stopped all that, and he actually stopped it there. So we'll see what. I don't think he's done himself any damage. I think that's the main thing.
He didn't help himself.
Well, I don't think he's done any damage though. But hey, listen, we'll move on because I want to talk to you about this. It's a serious thing, and actually, it affected me because if you ever tried to take out a loan, a mortgage, or finance on a car, it's extremely likely that the company has looked at your credit score. Now, that is the calculation that determines how likely they are to lend you the money and how likely they think you are to pay back the debt. But with things like the cost of living escalating, and actually a lot of people may have destroyed their credit scores during COVID because, I mean, there were so many things. People lost their jobs, people lost all sorts of things, homes, properties, businesses, that kind of thing. Millions of us have been taking extra care now when it comes to our finances and the impact of being unable to afford something now that might have on future borrowing prospects. So for today's Friday Focus, I wanted to take a look at credit scores and the impact that the cost of living crisis might have on it, and also how do you repair a credit score? Is it that difficult? And what are the myths about credit scores? And what if they make a mistake and give you a credit marker when they shouldn't do? How do you get that taken away? Let's start by speaking to Richard Lane. He's the Director of External Affairs at the debt charity Step Change. Richard, I wanted to start with you because I wanted to find out, in your view, because a lot of people will come to you with issues, how important is the credit score when it comes to making purchases or applying for loans and mortgages and things like that?
Well, it is absolutely important if you're applying for credit. It's going to be taken into consideration, and it's going to be what they look at in terms of what rate they give you. Lots of people who come to us, though, are already in financial problems, and their credit score is probably already damaged, and they're not accessing the most competitive rates of loans that they might be able to get. They're only able to get really high APR, the sort of things that you see advertised on daytime TV that can trap and push people into financial problems. So I think what we'd say is, don't worry too much. If you're worried about your finances, don't stop your credit score allowing you to get the help that you want. You know, there are lots of people who say to us, I've put off getting financial help or support or debt advice for so long because I've been worried about my credit score. Actually, that's the worst thing you can do for your credit score in the long run.
OK, so and tell us a bit about what Step Change does, because a lot of people may, unless you've needed to use them, you might not know who they are. So just give us a brief summary of what you guys do.
Yeah, that's right. So Step Change is the largest debt advice provider in the UK. We're a charity. We do it in a not-for-profit way. So if people are worried about their finances, they've got bills that they can't pay, credit cards that they can't pay, you can get in touch with us and we'll take you through a full budget. We'll try and understand your income, your expenditure, what debts you've got, and then we'll work with you to try and find the right solution. That might be a repayment plan, it could be bankruptcy, it could be insolvency. It could just be that we're going to help you write a budget that's better for you, that helps you get back on your feet. And we will talk to you about your credit score, what impact that's going to have, what impact a debt solution might have on your credit score, and in what period you can expect that to recover. But it's important that you kind of get that help so you can understand those options more effectively.
Well, listen, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about that. I'm sure there'll be people getting in touch with you as we speak. That's Richard Lane. He's the Director of External Affairs for Step Change, a debt charity. Well, I'm also joined in the studio by James Jones, the Head of Consumer Affairs at one of the biggest credit score agencies, Experian. Now, James, thank you very much. I almost called you Jane then, sorry. Right, James, I want to ask you, how important do you think it is for someone to sort of have a good credit score?
It's very important. I mean, this is your, if you like, your borrowing CV. So when you apply for credit, a lender wants to have a look and see how you've managed to pass credit to try and understand how you're likely to act as a customer with them. So we have your credit report, which is the data, your financial track record over the last 6 years. And then typically that's boiled down into a 3-digit number that we call your credit score that indicates really how risky you are in the eyes of a lender, and will help determine not only whether you can get credit products that you apply for, but in many cases how much you pay for them as well.
Have you noticed then since the pandemic that a lot of people, I mean, I don't know whether you are able to look at people's credit scores, or if you do, obviously you wouldn't disclose that information, but have you noticed that there's been a sort of upsurge of people getting extremely bad credit reports?
Well, let me just say credit scores and credit reporting is perhaps one of the most misunderstood areas of personal finance, which is why we work really hard to raise awareness of these issues amongst the public and to help give people more financial control over these issues. And for example, we're on the eve of Credit Awareness Week next week, where we kind of put out quite a lot of resources to help the public understand how all of this works. So it is an absolutely vital area. Interestingly, you might be surprised by this, over the last 12 months, we've seen average credit scores actually increase a little bit, in spite of all of the challenges that people have had managing money and so on, probably reflecting all of the various government support schemes out there, like furlough, for example. And also the fact that we worked across the industry to introduce emergency payment holidays to help people pause their regular payments to things like mortgages and credit cards and car loans to get through those difficult periods. And that has had the impact of helping shield people's credit scores from those difficult periods that people have been through. At the same time, a lot of people who've stayed in employment, maybe worked from home, saved a bit of money by not, being able to go out to restaurants as often as they like, maybe not going on foreign holidays, have actually saved a bit of money and paid down their debt. And that is an important factor in how credit scores are calculated.
Now, what if you're in the unfortunate position where, for example, I know a lot of the energy companies in particular, it's happened to me, one of the biggest energy companies in this country, who managed to give me personally credit markers for property that I actually moved out from. See, so saying that you've missed payments of things, and then you look and you say, oh wow, I've got all these missed payments or something. You eventually have a look at your credit score and find out, and then when you call them, it's very, very difficult for them to remove those things, and it takes time. What would you say to people? Because that's affected an ability to do this or do that, and I'm thinking, well, I didn't actually live in this property. This person's admitted that, oh yeah, actually it's a mistake, but it's still on the file. How do you get them to take it off?
This is important. It's one of the reasons why we give everyone access to their credit score for free on our website, so you can keep an eye on it very easily and through an app on your credit score and on your information. And then, that could act as an early warning sign if there is an issue, maybe a forgotten bill in an old address or something like that. And then if you do spot something like that, obviously we're here to help. If you get in touch, we can actually contact the bank or lender or service provider on your behalf and try and get things sorted out for you.
Really? So you do offer a service for people? Because those markers on work, I didn't live there, so there's no way. Do you know what I mean? It was a proper error. They knew it was an error.
Yeah.
And yet those things are still there. And I know, and when I spoke to my mortgage broker, because I was trying to remortgage at the time, that she said, oh gosh, that's happened to somebody else. And I suddenly started to hear a lot of people who have found themselves in a situation where their credit markers on their score, that they have difficulty getting those things taken off.
It's important that you can have confidence in the information that's held about you, because as we've discussed, it's important, it's eyeballed by lenders when you ask for credit, so you want it to tell a good story about your financial situation. So we do encourage people to keep a regular eye on their credit report and their credit score, and certainly check it maybe a bit more closely if you're about to make an important application like a mortgage. The sooner the better, really, because that gives you the opportunity, if you do spot an error or something maybe where you can improve your credit score with a bit of work, it gives you time to actually get that done.
And what about hard checks into your credit? So if, say, for example, if you do go for something like a mortgage, they will do a hard check. So they go through your actual and make a marker and leave that there. Those apparently, do they affect your credit score?
It's a good point. It's something to be aware of, because every time you apply for credit, a record is added to your credit report. And lenders do look at these when they're assessing your credit worthiness, because if they see a customer that's recently applied for lots of other loans, for example, that will send warning signals. So you want to, if you can, limit how many times you ask for credit and collect these hard footprints on your credit report. One of the ways of doing that, while still shopping around and looking for great deals, is to use an eligibility checking service. We offer one, there are others available, which basically leave only a soft footprint on your credit report, help you understand what you're likely to be accepted for, so you can ultimately apply for something that you're going to get and limit the number of those footprints.
I was going to say as well, I think some of the credit score agencies, in some respects, are on a level are slightly irresponsible, because one of the things it says about, if you want to improve your credit score, get more credit, so that you're using a smaller percentage of your available credit. Now, that's not really a good thing to be advising.
The reality is, what lenders want to see is a proven track record of managing credit responsibly, but not you being over-reliant on credit. So it's not about taking out and building up debt. It's about having access to credit, but keeping those balances low, making any expected payments on time, sticking within your agreed credit limits. Like we've said, limiting how many times you ask for credit, because that goes into how your credit score is calculated. Getting on the electoral register helps as well. People are often surprised when they check their credit report and see electoral register information, but we carry that information because it's a sign of your identity, if you like, your name and address. It's a sign of stability, and it will actually give your Experian credit score a bit of a boost, around 50 points. So that's certainly one thing to bear in mind if you're moving home soon.
Interesting. And Experian, very briefly then, because we're running out of time, if people want to talk to you guys, is there, they can get in touch to discuss how they can improve a score, or do you offer that as a service?
Millions of people check their information and their scores with us on our website. We've got a big team of helpful customer service agents in our contact centre in Nottingham. So we are here to help. We work very closely with the likes of Step Change. You were talking to Richard just earlier, and Richard's colleague is actually on a podcast we're putting out for Credit Awareness Week next week, talking about exactly those sorts of issues, the importance of credit scores. But actually, if you're in a debt crisis, it's not something really that's going to be a priority. You should focus on getting support, because the sooner you get on top of your debts, the sooner your credit score will improve.
Well, James, look, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for explaining all of that so succinctly. And that's James Jones. He's the Head of Consumer Affairs at Experian. Well, still to come, it's the great British debate this hour. I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Thousands of former employees have been protesting across the country today after the firm sacked 800 staff without giving them any notice. P&O says that the decisions was due to a loss of £100 million a year. So I'm asking, was the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? We'll be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's just fast approaching 5:30. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, in a few moments, we'll get stuck into our Great British Debate this hour because I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Thousands of former employees have been protesting across the country today after the firm sacked 800 of its staff without giving them any notice. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 5:30. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. The president of Ukraine says Russian forces are blocking humanitarian corridors to Mariupol in the southeast of the country. Rescue efforts are continuing after a theatre was hit by an airstrike on Wednesday. So far, 130 people have been rescued from the site. However, President Zelensky says hundreds remain in the debris. Meanwhile, earlier today, several blasts were heard in the western city of Lviv. In the centre, more than 100 prams, pushchairs and car seats have been lined up to highlight the unknown number of children killed during the invasion. Russia today has had its licence to broadcast in the UK revoked with immediate effect. Ofcom says it's not satisfied that RT can be a responsible broadcaster. With its headquarters in Moscow, the company accused the media regulator of being a tool for the British government, saying the public is being robbed of information. The business secretary has expressed the government's anger and disappointment following the sudden sacking of 800 staff. In a letter to the chairman of P&O Ferries, Kwasi Kwarteng questioned the legality of the move, saying the company appeared to have failed to follow necessary processes. It comes as hundreds of protesters demonstrated in Dover, Liverpool and Hull, as well as outside the London office of parent company DP World. And the Chancellor says his priority for the future is to cut taxes. Speaking at the Conservative Party Spring Conference, Rishi Sunak said the government has been dealing with back-to-back crises. He also promised to do what he can to ease the rising cost of living. Well, on TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Nana Akua will be back in a moment.
So this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and it's time now for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Now, staff were left shocked yesterday when the business decided to sack 800 of them via a video message. The decision sparked outrage, with union members and former staff taking to the streets today in protest. P&O says that the decision was due to a loss of £100 million per year, which was not sustainable. So for our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Employment lawyer for the Howard Kenny law firm, James Townsend, joins me now. So talk to me. What do you make of the decision by P&O and the way it was actually done?
Well, I listened to the Zoom call quite carefully. It must have been out of the blue. It must have been a shock for people. Nobody obviously likes to be given that news over Zoom. And I think from a PR perspective, it might have been a bit of a disaster. Fully understand the frustrations of the people. If you listen to what the Zoom call said, they said, look, we're going to be putting a settlement agreement forward to affected employees. And you've got until the 31st of March to decide whether or not you're going to take that settlement agreement. What P&O seem to be saying is we're going to pay you more than your statutory entitlement. Now, what I don't know, and you don't know at this point in time, is what is contained within that settlement agreement. But what affected employees need to be thinking about are their contractual and their statutory rights. So each of them, because they haven't been given notice, they have a right to claim compensation for the period of notice that they should have been given. And that will be governed under their contracts of employment. We don't know what that says, but there are statutory minimums. Additionally, anybody who is made redundant is entitled to a statutory redundancy payment. If processes aren't fairly followed, claims for unfair dismissal may follow for those with over 2 years' service. And there are obligations to collectively consult in certain situations. But this is a really interesting case because we're dealing with ferries. We're not dealing with bricks and mortar. We're dealing with boats registered in foreign jurisdictions that travel international waters. So there are some territorial jurisdictions at play. there are special rules actually that apply to ships. About 20 years ago or so, there was actually an exclusion for ships. That's changed. P&O may be able to rely upon a specific exclusion, which means they don't necessarily need to inform the government in advance, but arguably they still needed to collectively consult if the individuals and the ships are closely associated with Great Britain, as would appear to be the case. So when looking at the compensation that P&O should be offering staff, they should be compensating them for their notice payments, for their redundancy payments, potentially for up to a year's salary for any unfair dismissal claims, and potentially up to 90 days per affected worker. And no doubt the unions are going to be on top of this, and we're anticipating we're going to be seeing a lot of legal action.
Yeah, interesting though, because I thought, and I know you did allude to it earlier actually, that because where was the jurisdiction? Because they are, you know, they're on a boat, so, you know, sometimes I know people who work on boats and cruises and things like that. They don't, some of them pay tax because they're offshore. How does that work then? I know they've got unions to protect their rights, but how does that work? There must be, there's a fuzzy area here, isn't there?
Well, the Court of Appeal looked at this question in a case called Seahorse in 2018. And what they said was, we're looking for a connection with Great Britain. So these are ferry companies. I mean, I take it they come in and out of places like Portsmouth, Dover, those sorts of places. The workers seem to be British workers. The test is what's the association. And so it would seem difficult for P&O at first grasp to get out of their statutory obligations. I mean, there are also provisions within the relevant legislation. It's a piece of legislation called TULCRA, which talks about, you know, if there are exceptional circumstances, you can sack people sort of straight away without following the process. But it's not going to be likely to be applicable in this sort of situation. I mean, the company is owned by some Dubai-based wealthy business. I don't think there's going to be a business justification. So it is entirely possible that P&O are going to be on the hook for quite a lot of money here. It'll be interesting to see what defences they seek to run. But fundamentally, let's hope that they're offering decent compensation as they offered in their Zoom call yesterday.
Interesting that you mentioned about the owner, Sheikh, I'm not going to say the full name, but Sheikh Mohammed, who apparently his personal fortune's around about 10 billion. But they are justified in some respect because they've been losing 100 million year on year, and they're basically saying it's not viable. That's a realistic thing to say, isn't it?
Well, let's assume for the moment that the legislation does apply. UK legislation sets out quite clearly that you're going to look at each ship as a different establishment, and assuming you've got more than 20 employees on each of those ships, you should be consulting for 30 days. If it's more than 100 on each ship, it should be 45 days. You know, he's got to work by the rules, and if he doesn't work by the rules, then he should expect to get his wallet out and pay quite significant compensation. So, you know, we are in a time where there have been lots of businesses who've been in an unfortunate situation of having to make redundancies, but they consult with unions, they elect workplace representatives. You know, there is a meaningful consultation. You're supposed to look at ways of avoiding redundancies, and that wasn't done. There was an announcement out of the blue, and actually what was really interesting about that announcement was they talked about the fact that they're going to be outsourcing jobs. So, you know, there are employment lawyers out there who are saying, well, maybe there's a piece of legislation called TUPE that might even apply, and there's possibly some outsourcing arguments, and possibly, you know, further compensation can be claimed by the unions on behalf of their workers through that route. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the unions now pursue matters on behalf of their members, and much is going to depend upon the package that P&O are offering. Clearly, if they're offering a very generous package that covers staff, a lot of staff may take it, sign the settlement agreements and waive their rights to bring claims. But we need to wait and see what's in that package. That's a piece of information I'm afraid I don't know.
Very high-risk strategy to sack people in that way or make them redundant like that without even mentioning it. But starting out on Twitter, listen, James, it's a pleasure to talk to you. That's James Townsend. He's an employment lawyer at Howard Kennedy. Right. Well, this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. I know we'll be going shortly to the statement. In a statement, P&O Ferries said the business would not be viable without making swift and significant changes now. We've made a £100 million loss year on year, which has been covered by our parent company, DP World. This is not sustainable without these changes. There is no future for P&O Ferries. Let's take a quick look at what you've been saying. Darren says sacking staff, giving 30 minutes notice via Zoom, not even advising trade unions or government. Actually, apparently they did tell the government the night before what was going on. Even if no laws have been broken, it is off the scale, morally wrong. Karen says, no, it was a lousy thing to do, and as far as I'm concerned, illegal. I thought there were rules in place to stop things like mass redundancy. Ian says, as a business decision, yes, they had to save money because COVID put their company on the brink of collapse. They had no other choice. Interesting stuff. Keep your thoughts coming at GB News. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua on TV, online and on digital radio. Still to come, we'll continue our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? You'll hear the thoughts from my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Upik and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. And we'll be discussing warnings from cybersecurity experts of the need to be on a heightened state of alert over possible threats from potential Russian cyber attacks. But first, let's go over to the weather.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's coming up to 43 minutes after 5 o'clock. So let's get to our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Now, the company fired 800 of their employees yesterday via a pre-recorded video message that I think followed a little note on Twitter, and the move prompted outrage to the unions and politicians, with thousands of them taking to the streets to protest today. But is the mass sacking nothing more than a business decision? So for our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, well, just that. Is it a justifiable business thing to do? So let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Upik and also former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, I'm going to come to you first on this. They were sacked, but look, the company's been losing £100 million year on year. That's their justification, is it?
I mean, it sounds... So first of all, that isn't the way you sack people. That isn't the way you reward loyalty. I mean, many of the employees had been there for decades, and they were given 30 minutes, basically, to clear all their stuff out. I mean, and it's absolutely shocking, and it's wrong, and there obviously will be legal problems about it. But actually, as a business decision, the PR is appalling. I mean, there are people saying, I will never take a P&O ferry again. P&O had a really good reputation. Now they don't. I mean, they're just a junk company. So actually, it's a stupid business decision. I mean, it was bad morally, but it's a stupid business decision that if they had to get rid of people, and what they know is they're going to replace it with cheap labour. I mean, so this dispute's going to go on and on and on. I mean, there's going to be picket lines, it is a terrible way to do business.
I just have a slightly different view. An answer to your question, I can't tell you if it's a good business decision because I have never run a ferry company.
Right.
I do have sympathy with what Scarlett's saying in terms of how staff feel, but there's no easy way to fire 800 people. And here's the point. James, your employment lawyer, made this point. We don't actually know what the package is that's been offered. And do you know what this reminds me of? The miners' strike. And the deal which was made with many miners, which was actually covered in detail in a film called Brassed Off, which is a fictional film. But it actually said, here's the offer. Do you want it or not? So I think it's easy for us to be polemical here. When it comes down to it, we need to know what the staff themselves think. Is this fence sitting? No, I just haven't got enough information to tell you whether they've been mistreated or not.
They'll be given enhanced compensation because of lack of notice. So that could be a very generous package, actually. But it is, the way it's done, that wasn't great. Because initially they posted something on Twitter, and then some people got a bit, what's going on? I think they did that at about 7:30ish in the morning. I think 7:27 or something. And then at 10:30, there was an email to them where they then went on there and it linked to a Zoom call, and that's where they discovered.
Hold on, the facts actually, the facts that you've brought up actually don't matter, because what everybody knows is 800 people were sacked. These people are very angry. The unions are very angry about it. That's the headline. So what I'm saying is what could have been handled actually quite well, right, is going to be a long-running dispute like the miners, and it's not going to do P&O any good. That's the problem. When you say, is it a justifiable business decision, you've got to think about reputation and branding.
But hold on. Well, I used to be in HR in a big company. If you fire one person or lay one person off or two people off, you can do it one by one. If you start going to 800 people, one after the other...
That's not what I said.
No. OK, you can disagree with what I'm going to say. If you are going to fire 800 people, you tell 3 people, everyone's going to know before you go to the other 797. So I think that probably they decided we have to tell everyone and then deal with the aftermath. And by the sound of it, if they're within the law, you can't say they're actually behaving immorally. It might be bad PR. But at some point, someone said in P&O, and I actually know the company quite well because I've done other work on their ships, not the ferry part, but the other part. They will, and I actually think they're a good company. They're going to say, this is going to be bad however we do it, and this is the least worst option.
Yeah, but can I just say, Scarlett, as well, they are known to pay their employees quite well, actually. So they are one of the higher paying employers. And bear in mind, especially if you work on one of the cruise ships, you don't have to pay for food or anything like that. So they pay, even though they pay well, and then I don't think you even pay tax because you're offshore.
As long as you're
offshore. These are ferries. This is very, very different. These are roll-on, roll-off
these are also,
ferries.
but there's also, I think there's pretty much also cruise ships as well. It's the same company.
But the people who are being made redundant are not working on the cruise ships. They're working on the ferries. That's very specific. It's P&O Ferries. It's part of it. These are basically British-based people who are paying British...
So how would you do it? If you had been in charge, would you have told them one by one and said, keep it a secret until we tell everyone?
No, that's not
how do you do it?
No, what I'm saying is you don't say you have half an hour to clear it, right? Well, what I would do is actually I'd start talking to the unions and I'd say, we've got a real problem here. We've got a real problem. We're losing 100 million. Let's see if we can do it. Because that's what they're now going to have to do.
You can't run a business where you say to people, you're fired, but hang around for a while, because then you create a massive internal problem. That's just... Anyone in HR knows that you can't do it that way.
But what you do is you begin by talking... Look, we have got the Conservative business minister criticising P&O. I mean, it is absolutely across the political board that everybody believes that what P&O did was wrong. And they thought it through. So this isn't just me saying the union should have been consulted. Kwasi Kwarteng thinks the union should have been consulted. You do it right. There are processes.
Yeah, but they followed a process. I think in this debate, we're assuming we know more than we actually do. I'm only going by what I know about P&O, and I don't think they're a bad company.
Well, you know, and actually, as you pointed out, that the ferries and cruises are very separate, actually, so we'll make that clear, that it's not the people on the cruises. It
different
is the ferries,
divisions,
different division. But it's not, but in terms of what you were saying, Scott, actually, it's a very bad look PR-wise that people are saying that they might not ever travel on a P&O ferry or cruise or anything ever again. But then on the other hand, as a business, if you're losing 100 million every single year, just because you have a rich backer like Sheikh Mohammed who's got a £10 billion fortune, that might be a valid business decision. The only thing I really had, the real problem I have, though, is that they actually had the people who were going to take over the roles waiting in the wings to take over the jobs at the time. So those people were already ready.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not a redundancy. It's a sacking. It's bringing in people. But as I say, I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to give bad publicity for months, if not years. And actually, if you did the process properly, it would be very, very sad. But if you did the process properly, you might not have that bad feeling.
Well, let's see. Well, anyway, this show's nothing without you, of course, and your views. So let's welcome our great British... That's what you really think about the topics. I'll just go on regardless that we're discussing. Right, so let's speak to David Baum. He's there in Watford. David, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Was the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? What's your view?
As Lebig said, we don't know what the situation is. However, was it done under British laws about sacking or under, say, Saudi laws? Because they may be totally different. As far as I'm aware, in the UK, it's totally illegal to sack someone or make someone redundant and then get some and then re-advertise that post. If you're making the job redundant, the job is redundant. So I would have thought a company like P&O have probably gone into the legalities of it. It sucks, it stinks, but I can't see how they could justify it unless they're under, say, Saudi law.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is that they're effectively, because they're not really making people redundant if they're giving somebody the same job but for less money. Right. So you're not really doing
that. You're not making the job redundant. Because don't forget, they always said this whole thing is not you're redundant, the job is redundant. And if the job is redundant, how can you bring in a replacement unless you re-advertise it? And I think that's the law. You have to advertise the job, and everything has to be as a different job, or at least give people the opportunity to reapply for their own jobs. So I think this whole thing is probably under Saudi law, which is probably where the companies are now registered. And unfortunately for us in the UK, once again, if a company comes in from overseas, you are at their mercy.
Well, I mean, David, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's David Baum. He's there in Watford. Although I think the lawyer did say that they can show an association with the UK, then that could be the law that is followed. But, you know, I think there's a grey area. But this is the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, was the sacking of P&O staff a justifiable business decision? Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Bell says, probably justified. Greedy unions at the heart of the trouble. Yeah, well, possibly. I mean, look, it's a business, isn't it? So you want to make money. If you're losing money, then yes, you might think of bringing down people's salaries. And nobody likes the fire and rehire thing either, because that's where it would be, wouldn't it? I mean, I've had that happen to me, a company trying to offer me the same job but for half the money. I laughed in their face. Howard says, so that's probably what the workers would do. So they might probably be getting off. This is probably the best thing, but it's not done well. If this doesn't break employment law, it should be. It's disgraceful. Yes, that's the general gist of it, that the whole way it was done was awful. Thank you for that, Richard. It's now time, though, for our quick-fire stories. Some of the stories that are in the headlines right now. I'm still with my panel, former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire, and also Lembit Opik, former Liberal Democrat MP. Right, let's start with this one. The conflict in Ukraine is a long way from the UK, but it does mean that prices for the ingredients of one of the nation's favourite dishes are soaring. Is the cost of white fish, potatoes, peas and the energy to cook them that will leave, that's meant that they've all skyrocketed. And one chip shop says that they've seen hundreds of shops which haven't been able to cope with price increases, and we could see the cost of our Friday chippy skyrocket. Although in some places that cost is already extortionate. So would you pay anything for fish and chips, or will you be looking for another Friday night treat tonight? Lembit, how much do you pay normally for fish and chips if you have them?
About £9.
Is that all?
Is that all? That shows how posh your neighbourhood
it's
is.
expensive. It's not posh, it's just a rip-off.
Yeah.
No, well, I think that it's very tasty, and that includes curry sauce, by the way. Well, you see, now you're making a judgment
make
call.
sense on fish and chips.
But nine quid. I used to live in central London, where a glass of wine was 7 quid. So maybe it's a bit healthier.
I was talking to Patrick Christie about this yesterday on To The Point. That who has curry on chips? No.
Oh well, that's a completely different debate. Honestly,
or what do you? Anyway,
Actually, you've suddenly made me want fish and chips tonight. Just the very thought of it. I used to, before she died, my mum lived in Swanage, and I used to go down and see her, and it was just wonderful having fish and chips down there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I like my fish and chips as well. Salt and vinegar, but a tiny bit of vinegar, and then ketchup.
Curry
sauce.
Lots of salt. Lots of salt. And
That's
ketchup.
bad for you. NHS would object.
Well, anyway. Well, listen, on today's show, we've been asking, should Rishi Sunak scrap the national insurance rise? And according to our Twitter poll, guess. 90% of you say yes. Well, I'm with you on that, and 10% of you say no. Yeah, he needs to scrap it. I don't know what he's thinking and why he thinks it's a good idea. It's just going to make us all extremely poor, just like the net zero and all the other nonsense that they're bringing in. But anyway, we still have that. We've got to deal with this, I suppose. But I've got to say a big thank you to my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, and also former advisor for the Labour Party, Scarlett Maguire. Thank you so much for your company, and thank you to you at home for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow at 4. You can catch up on the GB News app. I'll leave you with the weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Lots of sunshine around today, and there's plenty more to come over the weekend, although it will be a little cooler on Sunday, and there will be more cloud around on Sunday too across parts of eastern England. But high pressure is sitting pretty close to the country, and it's not really shifting very far very quickly, keeping the weather fronts at bay, so bringing largely clear skies through the evening.